everyone. We are back with Higher Ed Commissioner Dr. Shannon Gilkey, and this week we will be talking about learning loss and some other topics. So, Dr. Gilkey, heading back into the fall, we want a more normal fall. Of course, the way COVID is going, we don't know what's going to happen. However, there, of course, is learning loss to be acknowledged. What can students expect when it comes to classes and maybe those relaxed standards from last year if they're less relaxed?
Sure. Well, when I think about learning loss when it comes to higher ed, it's it's well known that transition between K-12 and post-secondary, or being college ready, as we call it, it has been historically an area where it keeps students from completing a post-secondary credential. Typically, the gatekeepers are mathematics and English and language arts. The impact of the pandemic has what we're learning has really affected and created those gaps even larger. You think about just how much learning loss that occurred for all age groups. And I have a 4-year-old and a 7-year-old, and I can tell you what that looks like as a parent. But as a former teacher, getting those students ready to be successful in higher education, the pandemic has caused quite a bit. We are actually actively working with the Rhode Island Department of Education on a couple different strategies that we're proposing to use some of the ARPA resources for. And that's to really intervene, higher ed and K-12 intervening with our students to do things like dual credit and dual enrollment, to do things like boot camps together that focus on learning loss and really expand those services for students, but also for adults too, being out of work for a time period and trying to come back to post-secondary and having not been in class. Something that we want to make sure that we make that transition as successful as possible. And the pandemic has really caused that to go backwards, not forwards.
Yeah. And what did we see this past year when it came to different standards of, dealing with distance learning, maneuvering classes? What can we actually expect on campus this year? I know a lot of people are wondering, will I have labs?
Absolutely. Well, it'll vary program by program is the short answer. The longer answer is that, whether the pandemic was here or not, we still have to make sure that students that leave a degree program or a credential are ready to go to work. And if we don't do that from a quality perspective, our employers and our workforce is going to really suffer. So how we support, in my opinion, professional opinion, is you have to wrap more supports around students. You can't lower the bar on the standard. You have to keep the expectations high, but you have to support students at the same time. And if that's in a remote environment or an online environment, it's figuring out how to do that better in a virtual component or a hybrid of in-person, which makes getting students back on campus that much more critical to make sure that learning does happen from a quality control perspective.
What would you say college is the biggest challenge right now for colleges?
Yeah, I think it's twofold. Number one, it's making sure that we have safe environments from a virus perspective and getting students back on campus. Students are telling us by survey that they want that in-person learning experience. And so making the public health concerns, the legitimate ones when it comes to mitigating the virus, but also the perception of, because that also makes enrollment hesitancy occur when maybe the students may not feel like it's going to happen safely. So we have to do that using all of the tools in our toolbox to mitigate the virus and reach out to students and get them on campus. That's going to really help a couple things. One, it's going to help our institutions get back to what the pre-pandemic normal looked like, but also help our workforce because we're going to get students completing those credentials in higher education, which we know are desperately needed in the economy.
And talking about those credentials and how you were saying using ARPA funds, American Rescue Plan funding, when students, they start the year, they say, maybe I really am a little bit behind, I need to do this. So when was RIDE and RIOPC picturing having those credit recovery or boot camp type sessions?
Yeah, for students coming out of K-12 into post-secondary, there's no better time than the summer, to be quite honest with you. Students that have already left that high school experience, and this is where the population we're really concerned about right now, that had just experienced a junior or a senior year through the pandemic and may not have that next step planned out, may not feel ultimately prepared to go to higher education. We have to get them back into the tent on the higher ed side, because K-12 has another cohort of students that they're focusing on this year, right? So the summertime is a great time between the summer of a freshman, a sophomore, and even a junior and a senior year to intervene with students and wrap supports around them. Once they leave, then we have to get into the communities and try to capture them back into an environment where we can support them. That can happen during any time of the year and not just be the summertime. We can do that ongoing.
And I wanted to talk, so I know that you were able to speak at the Reagan Institute recently. Can you tell me about what that was and what the conversation was like?
Sure. The Ronald Reagan Presidential Library brought together a group of leaders, governors, several governors representing, I think, over 30 states that would talk about higher education. I joined our counterparts my counterpart, the commissioners for higher education, Louisiana and Massachusetts, to talk about innovation responding to the pandemic. And a couple key things that were discussed was, number one, the virtual environment was something that we used to our advantage to mitigate the pandemic, but getting back to in-person, we just talked about, we have to figure out how to do the in-person stuff and the online stuff in a better way, more of a hybrid approach. The other thing is the digital divide was really talked about, and how access to technology for populations that are typically underserved is found to be a more critical of a component to mitigating a virtual learning experience. Those that have access to internet and those do not. The other thing that was a key piece was early child care or education, pre-K, because it does a couple things when it relates to our economy. Number one, we know that folks that go to have early childhood experiences do much better through K-12 education, literacy, reading on grade level by the third grade, and then being successful in higher education. The second thing, for adults, we know the pandemic was really detrimental to women, particularly those that stayed home and took care of children. Having access to high quality childcare allows us to get women back into the workplace through higher education and enroll in those training courses. So early childcare and the digital divide were two big themes coming out of that discussion, that we might be able to do something as a country at scale to really help with both K-12 outcomes and post-secondary.
Oh, and that's interesting, because I know I've been following the pushes for childcare for even just the workforce itself. I know that they are paid very little compared to some other jobs, and even getting people into the workforce is difficult. And I know that higher ed plays a role in that. We need to get these people to, want to do these jobs and be able to, put a roof over their heads and live comfortably and, not have all this debt.
Absolutely. Cost to programs and certifications is a barrier. Compensation rates that you mentioned are a barrier. And then having an aligned career path that starts with pre-K and maybe ends up with an education degree can be a teacher preparation pipeline for us too. And we know that we have areas of need when it comes to K-12 teachers as well. So that we have an effort right now that our office is coordinating in partnership with RIDE and with the Cabinet for Early Child Care Education, where we're trying to create a system to combat that. It's a pilot program, but we need to do something at scale in this state and as a country to really think about that whole occupation. And it has a lot to do with how they're trained and the cost and access and affordability to the program.
Great. Well, we'll have to learn more about that pilot program once more information is available, and maybe it ramps up a bit. I guess as we're in August, suddenly, I know move-in will be right around the corner for some folks. We'll talk about that a little bit when it's closer, but just what are the big steps right now? I know, of course, it's mitigating any safety hazards and health and safety hazards, but what are these conversations that you're having with college presidents about getting ready for something that's just a couple weeks away?
Yeah, so the two big bucket areas are how to reopen our institutions successfully. And I would say it's twofold. It's one, the public health concerns of making sure that whether it's looking at all the different tools to mitigate the virus, vaccination policy that we've already talked about before, also masking, social distancing and sanitation and cleaning of the facilities. All of those tools, really, how do you leverage those institution by institution? But in this state is leading on really the coordination of all of our institutions doing things together in a unified way, because higher education is, we have about 75,000 students that come to our state for higher education. We really attract a lot of students. We're a destination state for higher ed. How do we make sure we do that keeps our public safe, because the sector is so strong in Rhode Island? That's one lens. The other lens is enrollment. Getting more folks that are adults that need that next piece of training and education in a program that ends with a good job that's available. We know we have a labor shortages across many industries, and if education and training is a barrier to that talent for those businesses, we have to make sure we get adults into those programs. And then for our K-12 students, the issue we talked about with learning loss, that apprehension to come back to come to campus after they've left high school, particularly those that just graduated, those are the two things I think will help us define how successful we are looking into the fall and in the springs for sure.
All right, great. I think that's all we need to chat about for today. I know we will have some interesting conversations in the weeks to come as back to class, back to campus comes about. But anyways, Dr. Shannon Gilkey, thank you so much for joining me again.
Thank you. Ashley, have a great week. Thanks for the questions.
Great.